Hey, you guys, it's that girl Alana. Each week here is something new in my walk with Jesus. We'll chat about struggles, victories, and faith, and I'll bring some guests along the way to do the same. Let's do it. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to That Girl Alana Thomas. This is episode 3 of season 1. I cannot believe we're already here in 3 episodes deep. Each week I am letting the Lord tell me what episode to record. I have about 50 ideas and I'm getting through each one of them, but I've had a couple people reach out to me and ask me, oh, what are you talking about next? And I always have an idea of what I'm talking about next, but this episode was actually scheduled to be episode number 2, but last week I just really felt like I really wanted to talk about what I did, feeling the love of Jesus versus intellectually knowing what it is. So all that to say, I'm very excited about this episode. It's been a long time coming. I have been sort of in the Instagram world with my businesses for about 4 or 5 years now. And I don't have a big following at all. It's like about 1,700 people, but those people that follow me, I don't know why, I'm just so blessed that I feel like I know a lot of the people who follow me, not all 1,700 of course, but I've made a lot of connections, and this has been an episode that has been requested. So if you haven't seen the episode title yet, we are talking about multi-passionate living and the reality behind my businesses, my corporate career. I essentially want to take you through the last 10 years of my professional life. That again is going to be probably half entrepreneurship, half corporate, and I'm hoping that you either find some sort of relevance to your life, that you find hope, that you find clarity, that you find inspiration. Hopefully, I love the life of entrepreneurship. My husband very much does not. He is very much thriving as an employee, and it's so funny that such opposites, he and I work so well together under one roof. But all that to say, I'm just really, really excited to talk about that experience with you guys. So let's get into it. With every episode I do, I always want to bring us back to scripture and ask ourselves, now what am I feeling? What does my heart say? What do I want to do? What's my gut? Even though I think if we're Christians, our gut is usually the Spirit, the Holy Spirit. But what I do want to ask ourselves is, what does the Bible say? Because that's what God says. So I have a verse that I want to really carry in as a theme for today's episode because it very much has been a theme for my professional life. So that verse, I've got it here, is Colossians 3:23, which says, whatever you do, work heartily, or some translations say wholeheartedly, as for the Lord and not for men, knowing that from the Lord you will receive the inheritance as your reward. So essentially that verse is saying, whatever you do, put all of yourself into it, whatever it is that you choose, whether it's owning a business or not, being a stay-at-home mom, right? Whether it's anything that you do, put it all for the Lord. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have earthly rewards for that. Your treasures are in heaven. And really it's an act of worship when we work with integrity and with our whole selves and with the gifts that God has given us, with the work that He's put in front of us in our lives. So that is our theme verse for today. It's something that I feel so deeply in my bones. I want to get it tattooed in some cool way. Not that I'm actually going to, but basically I read the whole Bible and I always think it's an excuse to get another tattoo because I'm just obsessed with like every verse that I read. I only have one tattoo. It's on my ribs, and it didn't hurt as bad as everyone says, but that's my favorite verse, Ephesians 1:11. Go look it up. I'm not going to tell it to you because I'll keep it on the edge of your seat, and hopefully that means you open up your Bible, but it's my favorite verse. It's like my life verse, and I have that Ephesians reference tattooed. So basically, if I could, I would just get all the references all over tattooed, but then we'd get a little out of control. Let's go ahead and talk about work. Let's talk about it. Multi-passion living. I did not know this was a thing up until maybe 2 years ago. So multi-passionate people, I think it really started to become a trendy topic in the last few years when people realized that you could make coaching services out of this. It could just really be a very dedicated topic in terms of content that you talk about. I literally have a course called the Multi-Passionate Method. It's kind of like my signature digital course for people to buy. So I'm one of those people, but that's why it kind of became trendy, is because it's such a layered topic and there's a lot to talk about and there's a lot that you could offer. If you don't know what multi-passionate living is, this essentially means that you just have a lot of passions in life and your life is full of a variety of different things. I will forever be a multi-passionate person, and I have been that way since before I can remember existing. Like, I have just been created to be interested in a lot of things, and usually it's a lot of things at once. Unfortunately for me, and I say unfortunately because sometimes time is scarce and I really pack full my life, and in other ways that's pretty fortunate because I do believe I live quite a full life, and I don't think I'm gonna have a lot of regrets in life. When I'm old and gray, hopefully I get to that point. But multi-passionate living is absolutely something I have embraced, especially in terms of entrepreneurship, but even before when I worked in corporate. And it is something that I plan to embrace even more deeply and more openly than I have in the past. So let's start from the very beginning. When people asked me what I wanted to do when I grow up, I had no idea what to say because I wanted to do everything. Like, truly, I couldn't think of a career that I didn't want to do unless it was like super physically demanding. Like, I didn't want to be a roofer or an electrician or something like that. That was never on the radar. But pretty much anything else, if you had suggested it, I'd be like, yeah, I think I could do that. So I had interest in a lot of things, and I also had a pretty innate confidence in my abilities. I just always, for whatever reason, because I had just felt so close to God for so long in my life, just felt that He gifted me, and I was so eager to use the gifts God had given me always. And that just really formed into a belief in myself that I was capable. And the scripture, I think, reinforces that idea too, right? We can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So there was nothing that was put in front of me that I felt like wasn't a matter of being able to do it, but it was a matter of if I wanted to do it. And I will say, thinking about successes that I've had in my professional life, that mindset is absolutely one of the reasons why I have been successful in most things that I start from a professional perspective. Is just the belief that I can do all things because I know I have a God who fights for me, who's on my side, who has equipped me when He calls me to the things that He has called for me. This podcast is one of those things. I knew nothing about podcasting, and maybe that shows in some ways, but I've always been so comfortable with very messy action and very unorganized starting points because I just really believe that it's kind of all going to work itself out. So my mindset has always been that way. So in high school, there's probably 10 different careers, which sounds crazy, that I was really heavily considering. So off the top of my head that I could just remember without really sitting down and thinking about it, I wanted to do marriage and family therapy. I wanted to be a makeup artist. I wanted to own a business. I wanted to be a real estate agent. I wanted to be an interior designer. I wanted to be a professional communicator, like I talked about in my first episode. I wanted to be a chef. I think more businessy things. Like, one of my favorite classes in high school was economics. So just like things that involved risk and strategy, just jobs that would, fall into that category. I could really see myself doing in corporate. But really, all this to say, just the variety of things that I really wanted to do. And there's some similarities to those. And maybe you find yourself in that bucket where you have so much you want to do, and maybe it's all similar and maybe it's all not, and that's okay. When I was sitting down, I mentioned this in my course, and I think briefly in the first episode, when I was in one of my first professional careers, I sat down with the CEO of that company because it was a smaller company, so I got to have FaceTime with him every so often to talk about where I wanted to be ultimately. And I told him that there were these 4 parts of myself that felt like they were in contradiction to each other when I was thinking about my career. One, I wanted to be in ministry or missions, so that's like a whole specific lifestyle. I did want to be a stay-at-home mom. I did want to do the normal corporate hustle thing and just like work up the ladder at one company for a long time and just really commit and just really find a lot of history there and just be a part of something. And then the 4th was I wanted to have my own business at that point. And I remember him saying to me, "You are in your 20s, So right now you have the luxury of being able to do this. You don't have to know what you want to do, and you can do that, but you don't have that luxury again when you're in your 30s. So you've got to figure it out now. And I don't agree with that statement, but at that time, a CEO title to me was just so inherently respected, and so just anything he had to say, and he was a Christian, so from a values perspective, I really aligned with a lot of things that he believed and said, and the way he operated his business. So I was like, okay, like I gotta really figure it out. And there's a lot of pressure from that point on. But all that to say, those 4 categories really felt like they were pulling me in different directions, and I didn't know how to deal with that. I just believe that there's probably one person at least, probably more, listening to this that feels really similar, that you feel really pulled in a lot of different directions in your life and you don't know how to practically make that work. I will say the practicality of how to apply my way of multi-passionate living is the reason why I created my mini course. I actually created it to be a formal, like, in-depth course. I hired a team of professional instructional designers to make this with me, and I was going to charge like thousands of dollars for the course, and just I felt in prayer, and I felt just that I wanted it to be accessible to anyone and everyone who would want to purchase that. So all that to say, if you are interested in this way of living, and I'll talk about the successes there, that is available, and that's the reason why I created that. It's literally just $27. Like, you spend that when you do DoorDash. So I definitely believe it's worth the money. I believe it's a lot more than that, because I didn't cut it down. Even though I cut it down in price, I just kept everything that we were going to be doing for the course, even when it was intended to be a very intensive purchase, and for people who had a lot of disposable income. So all that to say, I'll link it down in the show notes here if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're watching here on YouTube. I'll do that as well. I'll link the course. But let's go ahead and keep going. So I went to college first. Again, quick recap, because I already talked about this a couple episodes ago. I ended up getting an associate's degree in interior design, and then a bachelor's degree in organizational management. I never had the traditional college experience. I worked full-time when I got my associate's degree, and then I was also working full-time when I got my bachelor's, because I did an adult night program where I would go once a week to finish my courses. That really didn't matter. The content that I learned in school truly, I think it reinforced qualifications in my professional career and showed the seriousness of what I wanted to focus in, and people appreciated that I was going to complete that. But I haven't found that that is, at least my bachelor's degree really taught me much in terms of being in business or starting businesses. Really all that I've learned has been on the job. So my encouragement to you is, if you've ever considered starting a business but you feel like you need all this education first, no, that is not true. There are some things that I think might come pretty naturally to me in terms of business. I think I've just been gifted that way, to be a strategic person. So you might need someone in your corner who's like that, to think through things that maybe you wouldn't naturally think through. But I don't think getting a generalized business degree is necessary for you to feel like you have the equipped knowledge you need to start a business. I really wanted to make sure that I say that, because it's so important. I don't think college in a lot of cases is necessary, is worth it. But in order for you to skip college, you likely need to have a plan of what you're going to be doing instead. So I know, at least for my girls, we're not going to be saying that they have to go to college. We're not going to be forcing that, as long as they have something that they want to do and they're working towards that goal. Like if it's a trade, or if they want to go, if they want to be a hairstylist and go to that school, or if they want to start a business, or whatever it is, I want there to be an investment in the money that we or they put into college, and I would hope for that for you and for your children as well, for it to not be the assumed course for them. So I digress, because that is a soapbox that I will talk about for quite a long time. I'm not the college supporter in a lot of cases. So all that to say, I entered into the workforce very eager to work, very tired from working retail full-time while I was going to college. I had a full-time, it was a clothing store I worked with, so I was an assistant manager of that store. And I got a lot of really cool experience and exposure and responsibility. Like I went to New York City a couple times to work on their floor plans and the set design for the stores, because at the time I was in school for design. I got to really manage a lot of different aspects of that location store that was really interesting to me, like the schedule and the metrics, and it really enforced in me this focus on metrics that has sustained me through all of my jobs. I actually then went into a recruitment position when I ended that role, and I was looking for, a more serious office professional job. I got a recruitment assistant job, and that was very metrics heavy, and that was part of the reasons why I think they felt I was qualified for that position. So I will say my encouragement to you is, if you are currently at the beginning, or you're in that retail job, or you're in a job that feels like a stepping stone, be aware of and intentional about taking anything and everything that job can teach you. I learned how not to manage people because, man, that was really hard. I was 19 and I was younger than I think everyone in the store, and I was everyone's boss except the store manager. Managing women who are like 40 years old, this little 19-year-old who's like very ambitious and very intense and like has a lot of things that she wants to do. It was just a rough environment, and retail is rough. I would never go back to it. I think a lot of my friends and I at least have joked and talked about there's this weird desire as a woman that a lot of us have to open up some sort of retail store, like a boutique or a cafe or a bakery or a flower shop, something like that. But I would never because I've been scarred by retail. So I went into recruitment, which I worked at that job for about 3 years and truly loved it. I was recruiting nurses for senior care living homes. It was my first office job, and like I said, it was a smaller company, so I was able to have a lot of exposure. And I've been really fortunate that my entire career I have had exposure to an expectation to report to executives in every role, even that retail store. Like when I went to New York City and I was doing set design, and I had to get it signed off from executives in the company, or sometimes they would let me come on these management training programs that weren't intended for my level of position, but they just, for whatever reason, let me join them to learn as much as I could. So I got to meet higher level people in those opportunities as well. So that job, and then this next job, of course, because it was a smaller company, and I got to really work pretty closely with the leadership team. I will say that time in my life was when I was pretty lonely, and I put maybe a lot of importance and too much importance on my success at work. It was kind of like the thing that I was really enjoying and I was finding so much satisfaction in. It was like the thing in my life that was going well. And then all of a sudden, it wasn't going well there. There were some promises that I felt like weren't kept to me, like they had intentions for me, and they weren't ultimately followed through on. And then that would hurt me more than it would hurt the average person. Like I cared so much about being so successful at that job, because again, like still in my brain, I was thinking, okay, like maybe I'll do the corporate ladder thing. I'll climb it and be an executive at a company. And I was like, maybe this could be that company. I might have just hit the jackpot and I'll stay here for the rest of my career. Ultimately, for a lot of different reasons, God had released me from that job, and I moved on into the next chapter where I worked for another recruiting company, but it was a global one. I can't remember how many employees they had, but it was in the thousands. And I worked for their internal recruiting team, which was really, really fun. So it's kind of like the first time I got to work within technically like the HR department, because typically when you're a recruiter working for an agency or a firm, you're an outsourced support person, so you're not in the inside, interviewing and hiring. So it's a very different skill set or process that you follow. So that was really cool to see the inside of how that operates and how that works. Ultimately, that job is a job that I had when I was in when COVID happened. I had left that job, but actually not directly because of COVID. I had decided I didn't want to just get stuck in recruitment, and I was in my mid-20s, and all of my experience essentially so far had been as a recruiter. That was scaring me a little bit. I really wanted to have more of a skill set and more on my resume than just that. So I had been looking for a project manager position. It felt like something that was really up my alley and that made sense in terms of the next step. Project manager roles are really hard to come by. You almost always need a PMP certification, or the ones at the salary level that I was looking for did. And I really did feel like there were either entry-level project manager roles you could find or like very senior. There wasn't a lot of in between, and I was looking for a kind of like a mid-level. I ended up getting a job as a customer engagement manager was the title, but for that company, really, I operated as a project manager. That was the hardest job. I don't know. Retail, actually, I think was the hardest job that I've ever had. That was so hard because the public is really hard to deal with. And if you listen to my story, in my mid-20s is when I kind of had like my breakdown of sorts and started therapy, and I wasn't an emotionally healthy person when I was dealing with the public, and so everything felt so heavy in that world. So that was the hardest job I've ever had by far. But then this job was hard because the sheer workload and the intensity of the responsibility I had was unmatched. I was working about 80 hours a week. I remember one night I finished work at about 11 p.m. and I went to bed and I started work again at 5 a.m. and then that just started to be the same cycle. And this was also at the time where my food control and like starving and binging and then addiction really surfaced, and so I was not taking care of myself physically, which made then everything else harder, and just I got in a lot of cycles here which were unhealthy. But to put it in perspective, I was managing about $30 million of project revenue at one given time. And the industry standard at the time, I'm not sure if it's changed in the last few years, but at least 4 years ago, was about 5 million if you were a project manager of revenue that you would be managing in terms of projects. And so I was far above my qualifications. The company I was working for was also pretty messy internally in terms of processes and training, and I just really needed all the help I could get since it was my first PM job, and I wanted to make sure I was doing everything right. And there were things I was not doing correctly, and I was making mistakes, absolutely, but so were many people around me because things were kind of messy. Thus sparked my desire to start my own business and focus my work and my intention on processes and systems, because I had worked for companies that were kind of just okay with processes. I had worked for companies that were exceptional, and then I had worked for companies that were just really messy and all over the place, and I had seen what that does in terms of the culture of the company, and ultimately the fate of what is going to happen in terms of how quickly they grow or how slowly things either do not grow or maybe fall apart, like maybe very rapidly start to unfold because things are just coming undone every day with confusion and lost revenue, lost time, in mistakes and inefficiency. Oh my gosh, I could go on and on and on about this forever. And that was the reason I was like, I'm gonna bet on myself here, and I'm going to really hone in this belief that I can do all things that are put in front of me. And I really think that this is the next chapter that I want to do. And I started this business in 2020, so the year of COVID, which is just crazy to me. But I remember praying over and over to God, if you give me this business, I'll give you the glory. And I really don't like to operate that way. I don't think that that's, we don't give God if-then statements like, hey, if you show up, then I'll do this. I don't think that that's typically how he wants us to go to him. But it wasn't a, you need to prove yourself to me and your goodness to me. It was a, like, hey, like, I deeply desire this, and I know that if I get this, it's not for me. I know that it's from you. So you get all the glory, because I know that I cannot build this business by myself. It really was like pure intentioned. If you give this to me, I will give you the glory, because this is so not going to be for me. So obviously this is not something I could build by myself. And that first year in business as an online business manager was so successful. It was so fun. I had waited until I had 2 clients until I quit my corporate job. So I was bringing home about $4,000 a month, which was not as much I was making in corporate, but it was, you know, fine for us to live off of with my salary. And so I was like, okay, 4-ish thousand a month is maybe 5,000 is what I'm aiming for before I quit. And I did. I gave the company at my job like a 1.5 month notice so I could keep pushing and really like get as many clients as possible before that time comes. I also had a quarterly bonus that I really wanted to have, and you had to stay there past a certain date to have that quarterly bonus, so that was part of the decision. And then I really didn't want the next person that replaced my job to feel the confusion that I felt. So I wanted to be able to interview and to train the person who replaced me, because I just felt so, I just remembered how hard it was to do well in that environment. So I really cared about leaving that well and leaving that with integrity. So it was a very 3-layered approach. And I will say, as soon as I put in my notice, it freed the stress. It just lifted off all the stress of me of, hey, if I don't work 80 hours a week, it's ultimately not going to be a risk of me getting fired if something falls through the cracks, because $30 million of project revenue in that company structure was just too much. I managed about, 40 clients by myself on average, give or take, and they were all like practically like Fortune 500 companies. They weren't just like mom and pop shops that had like small contracts. I could go on and on. It was a very big girl job, and I applaud anyone who works in project management and works for that type of clientele, because it took every ounce of me to do well there. So then I had my first year as an online business manager, and I had been looking along the way for opportunities to do leadership and development. Like I said, I'm a multi-passionate person, and this is already coming out. So to recap, my my education was interior design and business. Opposites, but they do have similarities. Then I did retail, then I did recruitment, then I did project management. Now I'm a business owner that's doing operational support and consulting for businesses. Now I also had an interest in learning and development, so I wanted to create a course for people who wanted to become an OBM. I also truly didn't think that there were many good options for those courses that were available. There's probably 3 coaches at the time. I was the 4th that I knew of, at least. And I thought there was just really great opportunity to get into that realm. Now, this was a time that I was really focused on competition. And if I'm honest with you, up until the last couple of years where Jesus has really started to change my heart, I didn't want the best for my competition. I didn't want the best for the people that I was competing against. I wanted to be number 1. I wanted every success to come to me. And when that didn't happen, when there were people who were more successful than me that I was directly competing against, it really took a toll on my mentality. And again, this is me in the thick of therapy, in the thick of everything sort of unraveling personally. Things just felt like a lot, all like in every way of life. And I really started to have some bad habits in business, where I would start things and I wouldn't see them through to the end. God would put opportunity and work in front of me, and I'd get really excited about it really quickly at the beginning, and then I'd be on to something new because I didn't want to see it through, because when things got really hard, or when I wasn't doing as well as the person next to me, it really took it as a personal offense. I would start tearing myself down and say, oh my gosh, like of course they would pick that course. Of course they wouldn't pick me. Of course I'm not qualified. And I will say this, be very careful who in your personal life you bring into your business, even in conversation. There were very well-intentioned people in my life that also said like, hey, are you qualified to be an online business manager? Like, do you really have those qualifications? Or, hey, should you be really starting a business right now? Like, what do you know about starting a business? Hey, it's a pandemic. Like, do you know anything about that? So there was a lot of doubt I had from people, let alone my own doubt that I had for myself. I do think it dug in my heels a little bit, because when you tell me I can't do something, that's when I want to do it. I have always operated that way. When the director of our interior design program, I had never taken an art class before. Like, we had moved around a lot, so I had never taken an art class in school except when I was like 7. And it's a very art heavy program. And he was like, I don't think you're going to graduate. I don't think this is the program for you. You can't do it. So then that was the day that I enrolled in doing it. So there was already like a rebellious spirit inside of me. And this is really, coming out when other people are being successful and I am not as much as them, sadly. I wish I could go back and say, hey, when you're feeling that way about those people, how about you pray for them? Because they're not even your enemy, they're just your competition, and God calls you to pray for your enemies. So why are you so okay with the fact that you don't wish good on their business? That you, like, even if you think that your options are better and that you're a better coach or you have a better course, what does that change? That doesn't change what God has called you to. That doesn't change who you are supposed to be as a Christian and who God has called you to be. So I did not let the spirit in my heart or change my heart in that way. I just, I was pretty open about my faith online and in business. People knew I was a Christian, like kind of mildly, because you can't totally separate that from your business. If you do, I think that there's something missing there. And if it doesn't ever come up for you, whether it's fear that people won't accept you, or you just don't care enough to talk about it, or you just, that for whatever reasons, I don't usually think that there's a good one for not talking about your faith in business ever. All that to say, I was really missing the mark. Now, my courses and my coaching were kind of slow going, and like I said, I was feeling really competitive, but my retainer clients that I had really were working well for us, and thankfully they were, because as I mentioned before, the therapist that I was working for is quite costly, doesn't take insurance, but was absolutely being the vessel in which God was healing me in my life. And it was kind of this non-negotiable, like, this has to happen for me. So let's find a way to pay for it. And thankfully my business was the solution for that and was able to do that. After a couple years of being an online business manager, about 3 years, I just felt this urge, as I typically do, to start something new, and not to move on from online business management work, but to have another business, or to lower the OBM stuff that I was doing and just add something else. So I was speaking to my husband, and I was like, okay, here are things that I want to do. I want to have an OBM agency, so me just overseeing the agency and, having everyone else, be doing the work. I want to have a recruitment agency, since I knew that field so well from my early career. And I also want to have a social media agency, because I was building my social presence. I felt like I understood it. I saw the need, and it just made sense to me. I thought I would really enjoy that. It's funny now, because today, if you look at my life, I was an OBM. I did own a recruitment agency. That was the next step in the answer to that conversation, that list. And I am now the owner of a social media and generalized media company, Thomas Media Agency. If you want to check us out, we do podcast editing, video editing, social media, and website development. God has put the desires in your heart there for a reason. That it's not by accident. It's not to tease you. It's not to make you hopeless that you're stuck in a job and you can never do the dreams and the things that you feel that you're called to do or that you want to do. He's put those there on purpose. So never in my life did I think I would do all three of those things. But that is the reality of my life today. So I then went to start a recruitment agency. So I did that for a year. And I just actually sold that business about a month ago. When that business was sold, I obviously had an opportunity to do something new. And that's when I did the 40-day fast that I was talking about. That's when I was just in prayer daily, and God sort of brought me to the end of myself in terms of not really knowing what to do with my life, which had never been the case. I had always known what I wanted to do. Like I mentioned, I was always doing like 5 things at once. So it's not like I was ever lacking. But I had sold the business. The OBM thing I had kind of just phased away, even though I kept my Instagram presence sort of in that time. And I didn't know what to do. And for so many different reasons, God has been so good to us and so good to me in terms of prayer and all the things that he has brought together to make Thomas Media Agency what it is. We already have a team of 7 people who are working every day in and on this company, and I could not be more grateful to be the leader of that and more humbled to be surrounded by the people that he has brought around me, because when I look at those people, I think they are far more talented and far more gifted and organized and creative and brilliant than I am. And for whatever reason, I am at the position to lead those people together. So every day I am humbled. If any of you at the company at TMA are listening to this right now, thank you. I appreciate you. I'm so grateful for you. And I think you're all amazing. But I will say that God had brought me to each and every one of those agencies, and yet there was still this desire to do the missions ministry work that I talked about too, which is this podcast. So really the theme of my life has been I just want to do all the things, because still, even with having this podcast as a dream come true and this agency, I'm still thinking of not necessarily new ventures and new things to start, but of ways to develop the agency or to find needs and to fill them with services and with products. And with the podcast, how can I expand it, and how can I have other people on my podcast? And God really just has given me the brain of always thinking about what is the vision for the next step, and where do we see ourselves going. And thankfully, I have developed the skills along the way to learn how to put those things into action and really execute as well. So I have been so fortunate with the experience that I have had. But I do want you to know that if you are starting entrepreneurship, there are three things that I would consider. Number one, how are you with managing your money? Because you are going to have a lack of money for a few months or a few years when starting your business. Most businesses, I think it's about 70% or so, do not make it past the 5-year mark. So you have to be committed to getting past that, or if you don't get past that, what that means for your family. So that's number one. How are you with money management? How can you live on a little and save a lot so that you can eventually get to the other side of those 5 years and have more profit? 2, again, that classic line that everyone says, God does not call the equipped, he equips the called. So if you are feeling like there is a dream or an idea, or you are called to something like a business or like a side hustle or a ministry or just anything really, do the thing. He will equip you. In prayer, you will have peace. In prayer, things will unfold. As soon as you are going to God and you are asking to be in his will, he wants that for you. He wants to reveal himself to you. So pray to God, reveal yourself to me. God, reveal your plans for me. God, show me favor. God, bless my heart, my mind. Pray over your whole body. God, but take my feet where you want me to go. God, give my heart compassion and generosity for people who don't have what I have. God, give my brain strategy and wisdom. God, give my ears, the opportunity to hear and to listen to you. Give my tongue and my mouth, encouraging words and leadership. So you just pray over every aspect of your life, your person, and you do the thing because God is doing the thing with you. And number 3, I would say, is it's not as hard as you think it is. And I say that with all the respect in the world for the effort and the time I've put in for what it takes to have a successful business. But before I started a business, I would look at people who were CEOs or founders of businesses and think, wow, like how in the world did they do that? Even though I was someone who thought maybe one day I would own a business, it was still this thing that I kind of marveled at. And literally today, this is what you can do. Today, you can search for a domain that is available for a company name. You can purchase that domain. You can make sure that domain name is available in your county for a business. You file a business and you own one. You get the domain because you need a website. You get the handles on social media. You claim them. You file the name, you claim it, and you've got it. You own a business. As fast as you want to grow it is up to you and is up to God. You could have 1 client for 5 years. You could have 50 clients in a month. Whatever is meant for you will be for you. Whatever God intends for you with that venture, with that business, will be for you. And if you are a Christian, if you know God, it's just not so hard, because you are honoring God with your money. You are honoring God with your spirit. You are honoring God with your life and your worship. And Colossians 3:23, you are working wholeheartedly. So that is, if we're bringing it back to our theme verse today, that is what I would say is I have, and I can say this with all the honesty and integrity in the world, that verse is something that I really believe I have exemplified in my life. There have definitely been moments of laziness and moments where I could have tried a little harder, or I let the mental mess in my brain sort of get in the way of more progress. But man, if God puts something in front of me, I work wholeheartedly for that. And it has been in the last couple of years that it has transitioned, that this podcast, this business that I own, these children that I have, the husband that I have, they are not for me. My marriage is not for me. My role as a mother is not for me. My role as a CEO is not for me. My role here in the podcast, any listens that happen is not for me. It is all for the glory of God, because He gets the glory, because He has orchestrated all of this. All good and perfect gifts are from God. So anything good that has happened in my life is from Him. And this podcast, you guys, it's not like, I'm not in like the top 1% of podcasts. I'm not in the top 5 of Christian podcasts. Like, I don't have the numbers to say that I am extraordinarily successful from a worldly perspective. But do you know how many conversations I've had with people in my life now about Jesus because they've listened to this podcast? You guys, that in and of itself is so much success. And if that is what is meant for me, and if that is a success that is put in front of me, awesome. And yet, I will work at this wholeheartedly as for the Lord, not because of the rewards that come with working wholeheartedly on a business or on a passion project like this podcast, but because of the fact that I have an eternal perspective, and I know that in heaven one day, there are literal rewards. In heaven one day, there's going to be something shown for our effort here on earth. I don't think we as Christians ever talk about that, and I don't really know why. I think it's because we really pride ourselves on not being like a faith-based religion, or just not being like religious. You know, you hear all the time, I have a faith, I have a relationship, I don't have religion. But at the same time, Scripture is so clear to say that there is actual rewards in heaven that you are storing up based off of how you live your life every day. And I know that whatever those rewards are good. Good and perfect gifts are from God. I know if it's in heaven, if it's in our new earth, or wherever it is, and if it's something God gave me, I want it. And so that's why we have to know our Bibles. That's why we have to humble ourselves and submit ourselves in front of God before the Lord and say, whatever you have in front of me, God, I am scared, but you are a God who can do all things, and I will put my whole self and my whole talents that you've given me into this, because you are worth it, and you get the glory from whatever comes from this. I will say one disclaimer. This is not a statement or a podcast episode in support of workaholism. In fact, it's just the opposite. The times where I've stepped away from my businesses and poured that time back into my relationship with Jesus and reading the Bible and praying are the times where I have felt more peace, more energy, more joy, and more satisfaction in the work that I'm doing, even if I had less money. But typically it wasn't that way, because God was giving me wisdom. He was directing my steps. He was showing me favor. And you know what? Like, we're not believing in the prosperity gospel over here, but God loves obedience. God loves to reward that obedience in your life. So if you are following the Spirit, if you are separating from sin and you are getting closer to God, like, how much more does He want to pour blessings unto you, that person who He loves so deeply? So God is for you. Who can be against you? Work wholeheartedly for the Lord and not for men. That is my encouragement to you. I will say, I don't ever plan on going back to a corporate job. Never say never. You don't know where God will lead you. But I am so grateful for the life in entrepreneurship that I've had, for the agency that I have now, for the blessings God has given me, for the skills He's equipped me with along the way that I did not have when I started, for the people He's put in my life that are far more talented than I am. and for the fact that he wants me to be a part of his will unfolding every day. So I am this close to having a really cool statement. I'm putting so much pressure now on this statement. It's going to be like, now there's all, high expectations, but I'm just really praying through how I want to close this out. So season 1 is all about figuring out what this podcast is and getting the word out. So thank you if you are listening to this podcast now in July of 2024, I guess August by the time this comes out, because you guys are one of the real ones here. All right. Well, have a great week. We'll see you next time. See you Tuesday. Bye. If you loved that episode, be sure to check out my website at alanathomas.com for courses and coaching. See you next week.